You're listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview authors of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode 104. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting John Bishop, a retired orthopedic surgeon in Texas who writes a medical thriller series set in the changing environment of medicine in the mid-1990s. Bishop's sense of humor and wit create a story of medical miscreants capable of murder, mayhem, and greed. The first book in the Doc Brady series, Act of Murder, was published in 2019. The second book, Act of Deception, was published last month. And the third book in the series, Act of Revenge, will be published on September 10th, 2020. We chatted about John's writing process, the medical thriller genre, and lots more, so stay tuned for my interview coming right up. But first, a quick word about the online courses offered by Masterclass. As fans of thrillers and mystery books, I was delighted to find best-selling thriller authors James Patterson, David Baldacci, and Dan Brown were on Masterclass offering their insights in the world of writing best-selling thrillers and mystery books. And you can also learn from over 80 of the world's best minds over at Masterclass. And by signing via my link at thrillingreads.com/masterclass, you not only get access to this fantastic online training, but you're also helping support the podcast. So I appreciate it. For more info and to access the show notes and over 100 of my previous author interviews, check out my website at thrillerauthors.com. All right, here's my interview with John Bishop. Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the phone, I have John Bishop. How are you doing this morning?
Doing quite well, thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, please?
Well, I'm retired now, but I was an orthopedic surgeon in Houston, Texas. I grew up in the little town of Waco, Texas, and went to school there at Baylor and went down to medical school in Houston and spent about 28 or 29 years healing the sick and treating the broken bones down in Houston.
And that's in your book series. I've been learning about your books. The Act of Murder is a Doc Brady mystery. So I can see why you went with the medical thriller genre.
Well, yeah, they say you got to write what you know. So the only thing I really knew much about was medicine, and I made Doc Brady the character an orthopedic surgeon as well. So it was kind of. First, there's a lot of medicine in the book, and so that's the one thing I did know about. So I made him a character that at least I could relate to and knew what the patients expected and what the results should be and that sort of thing. So it worked out nicely.
So can you describe your books to someone who hasn't read any of your previous novels?
Sure. I started out with this first one called Act of Murder, and the central character is Dr. Jim Bob Brady, and he is a sort of an amateur sleuth and gets involved in investigating mysteries that happen to close to home. Unfortunately, the first novels, he has his next door neighbor's child is run over in the street, and he gets involved in trying to find out what happened there. And then there's a series of I've written 8 books. The Act of Murder has been published, and now there's 2 more that are going to come out. Act of Deception comes out June the 10th, and Act of Revenge comes out September 10th, continuing the saga of Dr. Brady and his investigations in Houston.
So when you were, did you always have in the back of your mind when you were practicing medicine, were you always thinking about becoming a writer? Had you always wanted to write fiction?
Yes, I did. I did a lot of writing. I was an academic orthopedic surgeon, so in my business, you had to give a lot of national presentations and write a lot of articles, and I always enjoyed the writing. I just kind of fell into the writing fiction thing on a lark, and it turned out I really enjoyed making up stories, So it ended up being great fun.
And were you a fan of the mystery, of the thriller mystery suspense genre before you started to write your own books?
Yes, I did. I was always a avid reader of mostly fiction, and I love the medical novels of Robin Cook and Michael Crichton. And the fiction authors have always been my heroes. And somebody asked me once if I had to have a dinner party and I had to invite my 10 favorite authors, who would I invite? I said, well, I need a bigger table. So yes, I've always enjoyed the fiction writers, and for some reason they speak to me. I don't know why.
Yeah, one of my favorite books when I was a kid was Comma. That was such a good, such a great book.
Oh, comma.
Yeah. I think that was Robin Cook, right? Or was that Creighton?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. It was Cook.
So you said your books are. It's interesting because your books are set in the '90s. So you're how was that writing in the '90s, 21st century? Was that a challenge or?
Well, yes, much more than I imagined because the first ones I wrote. I don't know if you knew this. The first ones I wrote, I was still working in Houston. So those novels that I wrote in the '90s and early 2000s were all weekend, nighttime, days off, vacation kind of work. And so I kept writing. I quit writing for quite some time, and I went back to writing, and I realized that writing in 2020 or 2018 or 2019 about what was happening in 2000 was an unbelievable challenge. Just even the restaurants or the movies or every little thing that would pertain to the current genre was tough.
Yeah, I imagine the technology too, because the internet was just getting started. There's probably dial-up in the mid '90s, as I remember.
Well, when I was first writing, I made these stories up. I had to go to the library to research that and research this, research that, and getting information was impossible. Now you click on your internet, and everything you ever wanted to know about anything is there. So that makes it easier.
Yeah. And so what actually inspired you to start to try to write your first book?
I'm not 100% sure. As I said, I was an academic orthopedic surgeon, and I changed careers after about half of my career. I got out of the academic medicine and just concentrated on taking care of patients and doing surgery, and I found myself with a lot of free time on my hands. And a very close friend of mine, had lost a child, and I had gone through that with them, not the same way that the child died in the first book, Act of Murder, but there was so much pain and grief that went on with that. I think some inspiration to write the novel came from trying to convey, what a horrible emotional upheaval it is when you lose a child. And once I got started on that, then I kind of think this fell into place and that fell into place, and so that was the impetus, for which I believe it started. Yes, was that.
And do you use your traits of your own personality? Are they involved in your character in Doc Brady?
Yeah, he's just a good old boy who wears cowboy boots that happens to be a good orthopedic surgeon and solve mysteries. And so, yes, that's me.
that sounds perfect.
Except
for the Hallmark
I can
mysteries.
only solve mysteries on paper, though. It's going to be a Hallmark movie.
Yeah, it sounds like perfect. That the mystery series that they got on Hallmark. That sounds like a perfect character.
Perfect. Come on, bring them on down there.
And so, what about your ideas? Did you ever? I mean, so the first book obviously was inspired by tragic events in your personal life. How about your other books and your cases? Were they kind of ripped from the headlines or from your work?
The second one is about Dr. Brady getting sued, and did he really do something wrong, or is it an act of deception by some shady lawyers and shady patients? And so that actually happened to me, and so I had to get it out of my system because it made me crazy for about 2.5 years. So the second book was in honor of my having that same experience. But after that, I have to say, the rest of them I've just made up. I'm not, I don't know if you write much, but whatever things come out of your head, you don't even know where they come from sometimes.
Yep. Yeah. Also, I can see why you titled that one "Act of Revenge." Then, after dealing 2 years with the lawyers and legal.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Yeah. And so what are some of the challenges you find when you're writing? I mean, what's your process? Do you do a lot of research beforehand?
I do some research on the subject. If I get an idea in my head about a subject, I'll do some basic research. But I know that you're supposed to write down an outline and create all this kind of stuff. And for me, I mean, it's just a void. And when I sit down at the typewriter, so I'm dating myself. Sit down at the computer and start typing the keys. The ideas just kind of flow, and I start thinking about things as I write them. And as sometimes will happen, you'll write about something, and you'll back yourself into a corner, and then you either have to get out of the corner or you'll just have to close it off and go another direction. So for some element, it's a trial and error. But for me, I just sit down and start typing and just kind of see where it goes. Weird, huh?
Yeah, no, I've interviewed a lot of writers, and I think like it's probably half. Some of the half outline, and the other half just sit down and see where the story takes them. So, yeah, and it works for like Dean Koontz and them. So,
well, yeah, Dean Koontz. I mean, what a prolific mystery writer he is.
Yeah, he says he sits down and just starts to write the story. So.
And he writes them well, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's one of my favorites. So, yeah. So, do you still find time to read with your schedule now and how these books coming out?
I do. I still find time to read. In fact, I'm getting through Harlan Coben's new book, The Boy from the Woods. He's one of my favorite writers.
Oh, yeah. I want to read that one. I haven't read that one yet, but yeah, he's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, it's very good. And, I just finished up a manuscript, and so I'm giving myself a few days off and reading somebody else's work, which I always think is so much better than mine.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And so, when you're writing a book, do you sit down and write every day? Do you like set goals of I'm going to write X amount of words every day while I'm writing this thing, or what does that look like for you?
Well, now that I'm retired and I basically play golf and play music and write, so I've got a lot more time now. But I don't limit myself to a certain amount of time. I start writing and I get this burning desire to get something down on paper, and I may write 3 pages or 5 or 6 or 7 pages, or I may write 1 page. I mean, it just depends on how I'm feeling at the moment. But I'm not adhering to a specific schedule.
And so what's next for you? You say you're taking a break right now. What's the next plans? Are you going to continue on with this series?
Oh yeah. I've like I say, the first 3 are going to be published, and then the others are waiting in the wings to see if they get published, and if they do, then I'll continue on. But once you start writing, it's like, I don't know, it's not like you have a choice. It's just like you have to get this stuff down on paper. I don't know what that is, some kind of compulsion, but it's just once it's in your head, I just can't not get it out. So I don't know how I'd quit now.
So what do you think? What do you think characterizes your writing? What's a good way to characterize your writing for our listeners?
You mean like medical mystery or
like what style is it?
Mystery,
it's like fast paced, is it short chapters? Or...
Yes, it's kind of James Patterson-ish, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's short chapters, 3 to 4 pages, and kind of make a point and then make a point and make a point, kind of like that. It's not a long narrative about fields of grain and 10 pages on how the lily looks under the sunlight. It's much more simple. I'm from Texas, don't forget, so it's much more simple than that.
Yeah, so your reviews are pretty good. I saw one of the quotes from one of your reviews was that it's humorous. Can you tell us about that, about the humor part of it?
Well, yeah, I try to throw some humor, but Dr. Brady is kind of a funny guy, so he's got a great sense of humor, and he has a great rapport with his patients, and so I try to throw in things that are funny and a lot of things about patient care and operating on people and all that sort of thing, things that happen in the operating room. They are quite comical, and so I try to bring that into the story without disrespecting those people who are still having to work in the operating room and work in the hospital, especially right now. But I try to add some humor to it, so it's not so serious. But eventually there's something serious happening, but I try to mitigate that somewhat with some good old Texas humor.
And do you find that difficult? Like you were saying before, you don't want to spend too much time on describing the flower, but like when you're writing a legal, a a medical thriller, like not to get too detailed on the medical stuff, but you want to get it accurate. Is that something you're concerned about when you're writing these?
Very much so. I want the medicine to be accurate. I want it all to be believable. I got something about act of murder. Somebody review said, that was true, but this wasn't exactly true. And I had faked my way through what I thought was it was something very remote, like the Krebs cycle in chemistry or something. And I was trying to allude to some point, and somebody wrote a review. Some friend of mine actually said, "You're wrong, Bishop. You're wrong." So, but it does take a lot of work to make sure everything is as accurate as possible. I try not to make up the science.
Where could readers find you? See, you have your website. I'm looking at your website. It's johnbishopauthor.com. That's the best place to find information about you?
It is. It's got the books on there and bio and, all kinds of stuff.
And I'd like to ask, before I finish these interviews, because I have aspiring writers who listen, any advice for someone out there who's trying to get through that first book?
Keep writing. Don't quit. You just never know what's going to happen. And it took me a long time, but it's worth it. So just keep writing.
All right, great. Well, so Act of Murder is out now, and the next two books will be out later on this year. And so I'm looking forward to checking that out, and have had a lot of fun talking with you. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.